Midnight rain washed down the cobblestones of Beacon Hill, but it couldn't wash away the brutality of what just happened in the alley behind St. Jude's Clinic. A woman lay broken against the damp brick, gasping for air. She thought she was entirely alone, left for dead by the ruthless men who ran this city's underworld. But out of the freezing shadows stepped a figure of ancient power. He knelt, his eyes blazing with an unholy, terrifying fury. The fluorescent lights of Boston General Hospital always had a way of making everyone look like a corpse, but tonight Sophia Hayes felt like one too. It was 1:15 a.m. on a freezing Tuesday in November, and she was into hour 14 of a grueling trauma shift. Her scrubs were stained with iodine and coffee, her dark hair pulled back into a messy utilitarian knot, and her eyes burned with a profound exhaustion that seeped straight into her bones. Sophia was a pragmatic woman. At 28, she had learned that the world was neither kind nor fair. It was simply a series of transactions and survival tactics. She lived in a cramped, drafty apartment in South Boston, worked overtime to keep the heat on, and spent the rest of her waking hours trying to clean up the catastrophic messes left behind by her older brother Arthur. Arthur had always been a gambler, a man addicted to the thrill of a quick payout. But 6 months ago, he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He had borrowed $150,000 from Victor Russo, a man who owned half the legitimate shipping companies in the Seaport District and all of the illegitimate narcotics trafficking beneath them. Russo was not a man who forgave debts. When Arthur skipped town 3 weeks ago, Russo's debt collectors had turned their eyes on the only family Arthur had left, Sophia. She leaned against the nurse's station, staring blankly at a patient chart. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a restricted number. Sophia let it ring. She knew who it was. She had already received 3 voicemails that week from Tommy Grimaldi, Russo's chief enforcer, a man known for taking a sadistic pleasure in breaking fingers before he broke spirits. His last message had been dangerously quiet, informing her that her grace period was officially over. "You look like you're about to collapse, Hayes," a voice said, pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. It was Dr. Aris Chen, holding out a steaming paper cup of black coffee. "I'm fine, Aris. Just waiting for the shift to end," Sophia lied, forcing a tight smile as she took the cup. "You've been distracted lately, more than usual." Aris leaned against the counter, his eyes filled with genuine concern. "Is this about that VIP patient from last month? The billionaire people are still whispering about how you locked down the ICU for him?" Sophia stiffened. Nathaniel Cross. Just the name sent a strange, involuntary shiver down her spine. A month ago, Nathaniel Cross had been brought into the ER through the private loading dock, bypassing all standard triage protocols. He was the CEO of Cross Enterprises, a real estate mogul whose wealth was old, vast, and entirely untouchable. He had arrived bleeding from a massive laceration to his chest, a wound that should have killed a normal man in minutes. But Nathaniel Cross was not a normal man. Sophia had been the attending trauma nurse when the monitors started going erratic. His core temperature was 30 degrees too low. His heart rate was barely 20 beats per minute. When the attending surgeon stepped out to prep the OR, Nathaniel had awakened. He hadn't panicked. He hadn't screamed. He had simply grabbed Sophia's wrist with a grip like iron and looked into her eyes. His irises were a mesmerizing, impossible shade of predatory gold. "Hide the blood panels," he had whispered, his voice vibrating with a power that compelled her very soul. "Erase the vitals. Do it, Sophia, and you will have the gratitude of a king." She didn't know why, but she had obeyed. She had swapped his blood vials with synthetic plasma reserves, manipulated the EKGs, and kept his biological anomalies a total secret. By morning, his fatal wound had miraculously closed to a mere scar, and he had discharged himself against medical advice, disappearing into a sleek black town car. He had left her with nothing but a heavy embossed black card with a single phone number on it. She had hidden it in her wallet and hadn't dared to call it. "He was just a patient, Aris," Sophia said, quietly shaking off the memory. "Rich people just like their privacy." "Right. Well, go home. Your shift was over 20 minutes ago," Aris instructed gently. Sophia nodded, gathering her coat and bag. As she walked out of the double doors of the ER and into the biting New England wind, a deep sense of dread settled in her stomach. The streets were desolate. The street lamps flickered overhead, casting long, menacing shadows across the damp pavement. She hurried toward the parking garage, pulling her coat tight around her neck. She didn't notice the black SUV idling with its headlights off across the street. She didn't notice the heavy, synchronized footsteps of 3 men breaking off from the shadows, following her into the concrete belly of the parking structure. All Sophia knew was that the air had suddenly grown entirely too quiet, and her instincts were screaming at her to run. The parking garage was a brutalist labyrinth of concrete and flickering neon lights. Sophia's beat-up Honda Civic was parked on the third level, a completely isolated sector at this hour. The sound of her boots echoed sharply against the walls. Click, clack, click, clack. Then she heard the counter rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. Heavy boots, 3 sets. Sophia froze her keys, slipping between her fingers to form a makeshift weapon, just like her self-defense instructor had taught her. She didn't turn around. She just picked up her pace, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Going somewhere, Sophia. The voice was like grinding gravel. It echoed through the empty garage, instantly paralyzing her. She slowly turned around. Standing 10 feet away was Tommy Grimaldi. He was a mountain of a man, in a tailored leather jacket, chewing calmly on a toothpick. Flanking him were 2 massive enforcers, their faces entirely devoid of empathy. "Tommy!" Sophia breathed, her voice trembling despite her desperate attempt to sound brave. "I told you on the phone. I don't know where Arthur is. I haven't spoken to him in months." Tommy chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He slowly walked toward her, the sound of his boots echoing like a death knell. "See, Sophia, here's the problem. Arthur owes Mr. Russo a lot of money, and when a rat scurries into the walls, we don't go tearing down the house to find him. We just squeeze whatever he left behind until he hears the screams and comes out." "I don't have his money," Sophia said, backing up until her spine hit a concrete pillar. "I work double shifts just to pay my rent. Look at my car. Do I look like I have 150 grand? "Maybe not in your bank account," Tommy said, stopping just inches from her face. He smelled of cheap cologne, stale tobacco, and violence. "But my boys have been watching you, Sophia. We saw the hospital logs from last month. We know you got real cozy with Nathaniel Cross, a billionaire, and rumor has it he's fond of you. Saved his life, didn't you?" Sophia's blood ran cold. "How did they know?" "That was a medical emergency. I was just doing my job," Sophia stammered. "Don't play stupid with me," Tommy snarled, suddenly slamming his heavy fist into the concrete pillar right next to her head. Sophia flinched, a small cry escaping her throat. "Cross has enough money to buy this whole city. If you asked him for a favor, he'd pay Arthur's debt out of his pocket change. So you're going to call your rich boyfriend and you're going to get our money." "I can't," Sophia yelled, fear giving way to sheer desperation. "He's not my boyfriend. I don't even know him. He won't care if you threaten me." Tommy's eyes darkened. He spit his toothpick onto the ground. "Shame. I guess we have to give him a reason to care, and we have to give Arthur a message." He nodded to the 2 men. What happened next was a blur of agonizing pain and sheer terror. Sophia fought wildly, kicking and scratching, but she was 90 pounds lighter than the smallest man there. A heavy fist caught her in the stomach, driving the air from her lungs. She collapsed to her knees, gasping. Before she could recover, a steel-toed boot connected with her ribs. The sickening crack echoed loudly. "Drag her out back. There's an alley with no cameras off 4th Street, Tommy ordered, coldly adjusting his jacket. They dragged her by her arms down the concrete stairwell, her heels scraping helplessly against the stairs. Sophia was dizzy, her vision swimming with black spots, the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth. They threw her like garbage into the freezing, rain-slicked alleyway behind the clinic adjacent to the garage. She hit the brick wall hard, collapsing into a pile of trash bags. The rain immediately began to soak through her scrubs. Tommy crouched down, grabbing a handful of her dark hair and yanking her head back. Sophia let out a choked sob. Her face was already swelling, her left eye forced shut, blood pouring from a deep cut above her brow. "You have 24 hours to get the money from Cross," Tommy whispered into her ear. "Or next time we don't stop at your ribs. We put you in a wood chipper. Understand?" He didn't wait for an answer. He violently shoved her head back against the brick, stood up, and walked away. The 3 men laughed as they disappeared down the street, their footsteps fading into the heavy downpour of the Boston night. Sophia was left alone in the dark. She tried to move, to reach into her pocket for her phone, but the pain in her side was excruciating. Her ribs were shattered. She was bleeding internally. The cold rain was draining the last remnants of body heat she possessed. As the edges of her vision began to tunnel, she realized with terrifying clarity that she was not going to make it through the night. She was going to die in this alley, another forgotten casualty of a city that didn't care. She closed her eyes, letting the darkness take her. The transition from life to death was supposed to be peaceful, but Sophia was abruptly pulled back to consciousness by a sudden, drastic shift in the air pressure. The freezing wind died down. The relentless rain seemed to stop falling directly over her, blocked by a massive, towering silhouette that had dropped from the rooftop above without without making a single sound. Sophia forced her good eye open, peering through the blood and rain. A man stood before her. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored black trench coat, his broad shoulders blocking the dim, ambient light of the street lamps. As he stepped closer, the shadows receded from his face, revealing aristocratic features carved from pale marble, a sharp jawline, and eyes that glowed in the darkness like molten gold. Nathaniel Cross. He didn't look like a CEO tonight. He looked like an apex predator that had just caught the scent of blood. His gaze swept over the alley, analyzing the scuff marks on the ground, the discarded toothpick, and finally settling on Sophia's broken, battered body. The temperature in the alley plummeted. The air grew thick, heavy, with an ancient, suffocating power that made the hair on Sophia's arms stand up. Nathaniel fell to his knees in the puddles of rain, uncaring about his expensive clothes. His hands hovered over her, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a rage so profound it seemed to warp the very reality around him. He gently touched the side of her swollen, bruised face. His fingers were ice cold, yet strangely comforting. "Who did this to you?" His voice was a lethal whisper. It wasn't a question. It was a demand for a name to write on a tombstone. "Tommy Grimaldi?" Sophia coughed a violent spasm, racking her chest, bringing up a speck of blood to her lips. "Victor Rousseau's men." Nathaniel's golden eyes flared with a terrifying luminescence. The names registered in his centuries-old mind. A local crime syndicate, filthy, insignificant mortals playing at power. They had touched what belonged to him. Since the night she saved him, Nathaniel had marked Sophia. He had placed his protection over her, tracking her life from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to approach her. These men hadn't just assaulted a nurse. They had laid hands on the chosen mate of the vampire king of the eastern seaboard. "Shh, do not speak," Nathaniel commanded softly. He bit into his own wrist, his elongated, razor-sharp fangs easily piercing his flesh. Thick crimson blood welled up, vibrant and glowing with supernatural vitality. He pressed his wrist to her lips. "Drink, Sophia, just a drop. It will knit your bones and keep you tethered to this world." She was too weak to resist. The moment the warm liquid touched her tongue, it tasted like spiced wine and electricity. An immediate fiery warmth rushed through her veins. The agonizing pain in her ribs began to dull, replaced by a soothing numbness. Her breathing eased. Nathaniel reached into his coat and produced a sleek phone. He pressed a single button. "Sebastian," Nathaniel spoke into the receiver, his voice devoid of all humanity. "Bring the armored medical transport to the alley off 4th Street. Sophia is injured. Secure her. Keep her comfortable." He paused, his golden eyes narrowing into slits of pure, unadulterated hatred. "And assemble the guard. Seal the city limits. No flights leave Logan. No boats leave the harbor. No cars cross the bridges." He hung up, looking back down at Sophia as she drifted into a healing, pain-free sleep. He carefully brushed a wet strand of hair from her forehead. "Rest now, my sweet girl. By the time you wake, the men who caused you pain will be nothing but ash and memory." Nathaniel stood up, the regal veneer completely shattering, his fangs fully descended. The illusion of the billionaire was gone. The ancient monster of the night had awakened. He vanished into the shadows, a blur of unnatural speed. His first stop was the Grimaldi safe house, a heavily guarded warehouse in the North End. There were 15 armed men inside playing poker and drinking cheap whiskey, celebrating their successful intimidation of a helpless woman. They didn't hear him enter. They only felt the sudden freezing chill. Tommy Grimaldi was laughing at a joke when the steel-reinforced door was violently ripped off its heavy hinges and hurled across the room, crushing 2 men instantly against the far wall. The laughter stopped. The men scrambled for their automatic weapons, shouting in panic. Nathaniel walked through the dust and debris. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't need to. Guns fired the deafening roar of automatic fire filling the warehouse, but the bullets flattened against his flesh, or missed entirely as he moved faster than the human eye could track. He grabbed a man by the throat and threw him with such force through a brick pillar that the ceiling groaned. He moved with a terrifying, silent elegance, tearing through the mobsters with bare hands, snapping necks and crushing chests without breaking a sweat. Blood sprayed across the poker tables. The screams of hardened criminals echoed into the night, begging for a mercy that Nathaniel had abandoned centuries ago. Tommy Grimaldi tried to run. He scrambled toward the back exit, slipping in the blood of his own men, weeping in sheer terror. He reached for the doorknob, but a cold, vice-like grip closed around the back of his neck, lifting his massive frame completely off the ground, as if he weighed nothing. Tommy gagged, kicking his legs frantically in the air. He looked over his shoulder and stared directly into the glowing, predatory eyes of Nathaniel Cross. "You Tommy choked out his arrogance, entirely replaced by horrifying realization. "You're him, the billionaire? I am a great many things, Thomas." Nathaniel hissed, his voice echoing in Tommy's mind rather than his ears. "But tonight I am your apocalypse. You broke her ribs, I will break your lineage." Nathaniel didn't kill Tommy immediately. He was an artist of agony, and he wanted this mortal to understand the exact magnitude of his mistake. The screams that followed were so harrowing that the neighborhood dogs began to howl in distress. By 3:30 a.m., the warehouse was a graveyard of torn limbs and shattered men. But Nathaniel wasn't done. He stepped out into the rain, his coat perfectly spotless, the blood sliding right off his supernatural aura. Tommy Grimaldi was dead, but Victor Russo was the head of the snake. Word travels fast in the underworld. By 4 a.m., frantic radio calls and panicked encrypted messages were flying across Boston. Safe houses were going dark one by one. The Russo family's top lieutenants were found utterly destroyed in their penthouses, their security details slaughtered without a single alarm being tripped. Fear, thick and absolute, gripped the criminal underbelly of the city. Mob bosses barricaded themselves in underground bunkers. Armed thugs abandoned their posts and fled into the woods. By dawn, every man in the city who had ever flown Russo's colors realized they were being hunted by a ghost. Every man in the city feared for his life, and Victor Russo, trembling in his fortified seaport mansion, realized that he had unwittingly declared war on a king. Consciousness returned to Sophia Hayes, not with a violent jolt, but with the slow velvet pull of a deep tide. She did not wake up shivering on the freezing asphalt of a St. Jude's alleyway, nor did she feel the agonizing, jagged sting of shattered ribs piercing her lungs. Instead, her senses were flooded with an impossible warmth. She opened her eyes, her pupils adjusting to the muted golden ambient lighting of a sprawling bedroom. The ceiling above her was vaulted and painted in a dark matte charcoal, while floor-to-ceiling windows formed the entirety of the western wall, offering a breathtaking, dizzying view of the Boston skyline. She was high above the city, higher than any normal residential building. Judging by the angle of the Custom House Tower and the Charles River winding like a silver ribbon below, she was in the penthouse of the Millennium Tower. Sophia pushed herself up, her hands gripping the impossibly soft white fret linens that draped over a massive mahogany king-sized bed. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She remembered the alley. She remembered Tommy Grimaldi's boot, the taste of her own copper blood, the absolute certainty that she was going to die in the rain. Frantically, she tore open the front of the oversized silk button-down shirt someone had dressed her in. She ran her trembling fingers along her ribcage, tracing the skin where she knew bone had been pulverized just hours ago. Nothing. Her skin was perfectly smooth. There was no bruising, no swelling, no agonizing pain. When she drew a deep breath, she scrambled out of the bed, her bare feet hitting the heated Brazilian walnut floor. She rushed to a massive black marble vanity mirror in the corner of the room. The deep laceration above her eyebrow, the one Tommy had given her when he slammed her against the brick, was gone. Her left eye wasn't swollen shut. She looked healthier, more vibrant than she had in years. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice echoing in the silent, cavernous room. "I was dying. Medical impossibility is a matter of perspective, Miss Hayes," a smooth, impeccably polite voice said from the doorway. Sophia spun around, her heart hammering in her throat instinctively, backing up against the vanity. Standing in the threshold was a tall, elegantly slender man dressed in a bespoke charcoal three-piece suit. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his pale blue eyes held a serene, unnerving calmness. He held a sterling silver tray bearing a bone china teacup and a small crystal pitcher of water. "Who are you? Where am I?" Sophia demanded, her hospital instincts kicking in, searching the room for a weapon. "My name is Sebastian," the man replied, bowing his head slightly as he stepped into the room, setting the tray down on a glass nightstand. "I am the estate manager for Mr. Cross. You are currently in his private residence. You have been asleep for exactly 7 hours. I have brought you Earl Grey tea. It will help soothe the lingering adrenaline in your system." "Mr. Cross," Sophia breathed, the memories rushing back with terrifying clarity. The alley, the towering figure in the trench coat, the glowing, predatory golden eyes, the blood. "He made me drink his blood." She touched her lips, a phantom spark of electricity rushing over her tongue at the memory. "Where is he? Where is Nathaniel?" Sebastian's placid expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened slightly. "Mr. Cross is currently concluding some pressing business regarding the men who dared to lay hands on you. He requested that you remain here where it is entirely safe. Concluding business? Sophia's voice pitched higher, a desperate edge bleeding into her tone. Sebastian, those men were enforcers for Victor Russo. They are the most dangerous syndicate in New England. If Nathaniel goes after them, they will kill him. You have to call the police. You have to— Miss Hayes, Sebastian interrupted softly, his voice carrying a strange resonant frequency that forced Sophia to pause. With all due respect to your mortal law enforcement, the police do not govern the shadows of this city, and you need not fear for Mr. Cross's safety. Victor Russo's men are not the apex predators of Boston. A slow, chilling smile touched the corners of Sebastian's mouth. They are merely the prey. Before Sophia could comprehend the terrifying implication of his words, the heavy oak double doors at the far end of the penthouse hallway swung open with a resounding thud. The air pressure in the room instantly dropped. Sophia felt a strange magnetic pull in her chest, a sudden acceleration of her pulse that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the man walking toward the bedroom. Nathaniel Cross stepped into the light. He had shed the trench coat. He was dressed in a pristine white dress shirt and dark slacks, though the cuffs of his shirt were rolled up to his forearms. He looked devastatingly handsome, an aristocratic masterpiece of sharp jawlines and thick dark hair. But as Sophia looked closer, the illusion of the civilized billionaire shattered. His knuckles were split and stained with dried blood. There was a smear of crimson on his pristine collar, but it was his eyes that truly terrified her. The human facade was gone. His irises were a blazing, mesmerizing gold swirling with an ancient, unholy violence that hadn't fully subsided. He stopped at the threshold of the bedroom, his gaze locking onto Sophia. The sheer intensity of his stare felt like a physical weight against her skin. "Leave us, Sebastian," Nathaniel commanded, his voice a low, vibrating baritone that sent a shiver down Sophia's spine. "Yes, sire," Sebastian murmured, bowing deeply before slipping out of the room and closing the door with a soft click. Sophia stood frozen as Nathaniel slowly walked toward her. With every step he took, the room felt smaller, the air thicker. He stopped just inches from her, towering over her petite frame. Up close, he smelled of ozone, expensive bergamot and copper. He reached out his long, cold fingers, gently tracing the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing over the exact spot where her skin had been bruised hours ago. "You are fully healed," Nathaniel murmured, the golden fire in his eyes softening just a fraction. "No lingering pain, no shortness of breath." "What did you do?" Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. She didn't pull away from his touch. God help her, she didn't want to. "In the alley, your eyes, your teeth. You healed me. What are you—" "I am the monster that monsters fear in the dark, Sophia," he said softly, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "And as of tonight, Thomas Grimaldi and every man who was in that alley will never draw breath again." Sophia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "You killed them, Nathaniel. You can't just—" "I tore them apart," Nathaniel corrected, his voice hardening, devoid of any remorse. "I broke them until they begged, and then I broke them some more. No one touches what is mine, Sophia. No one. What is mine?" The words echoed in her mind, a possessive decree that should have horrified the fiercely independent nurse. But the blood running through her veins, his blood hummed in agreement, tying her fate to the king of the night. 3 miles away, in the exclusive, heavily fortified seaport district, Victor Russo was discovering exactly what it meant to be prey. Russo's penthouse, atop Pier 4, was a fortress. It boasted bulletproof glass, a private elevator with biometric scanners, and a security detail composed of ex-military mercenaries who charged $10,000 a night. Russo was a man who understood power, but as he stood by his panoramic window, pouring his 4th glass of Macallan 25, his hand shook violently. The encrypted radios on the mahogany dining table had been screaming for an hour, broadcasting the frantic, bloody deaths of his top lieutenants across the city. Now there was only dead air, static. "Status report," Russo barked, turning to the heavily armed man standing by the elevator banks. Dominic Croft, the head of Russo's private security, racked the slide of his customized assault rifle. Croft wasn't a standard street thug. He was a dishonorably discharged Blackwater operative who had seen things in the remote caves of Eastern Europe that most men thought were fairy tales. "Comms are completely dark, boss," Croft said, his jaw tight. He pulled a heavy canvas duffel bag onto the table and unzipped it, pulling out magazines loaded with incendiary rounds and a set of high-lumen UV tactical flashlights. "Whoever is hitting your crew, they're fast. They bypass the biometric locks on the North End safe house without tripping a single wire. The cops haven't even been called. It's a clean sweep." "It's one man! They said it's one man in a suit," Rousseau screamed, throwing his crystal tumbler against the wall. It shattered amber liquid bleeding down the expensive wallpaper. "How is one man dismantling a $50 million syndicate in 3 hours? "Because he's not a man," Victor Croft said coldly, tossing a pair of UV goggles to his second-in-command. "I've heard rumors about the elite in this city. Old money, money that doesn't age. You picked a fight with a nightwalker, a vampire." Rousseau stared at Croft, his face draining of color. "You're insane." "I'm prepared," Croft corrected, aiming his rifle at the reinforced elevator doors. "But if I were you, I'd start praying." Suddenly, the power in the penthouse completely failed. The luxurious ambient lighting, the hum of the climate control, the glowing security panels, all of it died instantly. The only light left in the massive room was the faint haunting glow of the city skyline filtering through the rain-streaked windows. "Night vision on suppressive fire if the doors breach?" Croft barked his men, immediately raising their weapons, the red laser sights cutting through the darkness. But the elevator doors didn't open. Instead, the temperature in the room plummeted so fast that the men's breath plumed in the air. A terrifying rhythmic sound began to echo from the expansive glass ceiling above them. Tap, 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 footsteps, walking casually across the slanted, rain-slicked glass of the roof directly above their heads. Rousseau backed away, his heart hammering against his ribs, his breath catching in his throat. Suddenly, the reinforced bulletproof glass ceiling shattered inward with an explosive roar. Shards of glass rained down like lethal confetti. Before a single mercenary could pull a trigger, a blur of motion dropped into the center of the room. Croft fired his incendiary rounds, lighting up the darkness like a strobe light. Bang, bang, bang. One of the rounds clipped Nathaniel's shoulder. The vampire hissed a terrifying guttural sound that rattled the bones of everyone in the room. The incendiary phosphorus burned against his immortal flesh, but it only slowed him for a microsecond. Nathaniel moved with predatory grace. He didn't use weapons. His body was the weapon. He swept his arm out, shattering the skull of the mercenary to his left. With a casual backhand, he grabbed Croft's rifle, crushing the steel barrel in his bare hand like it was made of tin before driving his knee into Croft's chest. The mercenary flew backward, crashing through the mahogany dining table, his ribs instantly completely pulverized. Within 30 seconds, an absolute terrifying silence returned to the penthouse. 7 highly trained mercenaries lay dead or incapacitated. Victor Rousseau was entirely alone. He scrambled backward across the expensive rug, his back hitting the wet glass of the broken window. Nathaniel stood in the center of the room. The burning phosphorus on his shoulder sputtered and dyed the flesh already knitting itself back together in a wisp of smoke. His golden eyes locked onto Rousseau, burning through the darkness like twin suns. "Nathaniel Cross!" Rousseau choked out, his voice trembling so badly he could barely form the words. He held up his hands in a desperate plea. "Cross, wait, listen to me. This is about Arthur Hayes, right? The debt I didn't know the girl was yours. I swear on my life, I didn't know." Nathaniel walked slowly toward him, his heavy dress shoes crunching over the broken glass. "You sent beasts to break the ribs of an innocent woman for a debt she did not owe. You thought yourself a king of this city, Victor." "I'll erase it," Rousseau pleaded, tears of sheer terror spilling down his face as the towering vampire loomed over him. "Arthur owed me 150 grand. It's gone. I'll wire you 10 million right now. Just let me walk away." Nathaniel reached down his cold fingers, wrapping around the lapels of Rousseau's expensive Italian suit. With terrifying ease, he lifted the mob boss completely off the floor, dangling him over the edge of the shattered window. The freezing rain whipped against Rousseau's face, the 300-foot drop to the concrete below, waiting hungry in the dark. "Arthur's debt is indeed erased," Nathaniel whispered, his fangs fully extended, his breath chilling Rousseau to the bone. "But the cost of touching Sophia Hayes is not paid in gold, Victor. It is paid in blood." Nathaniel's grip tightened. He didn't throw Rousseau out the window. He didn't give him the mercy of a quick fall. Instead, the Vampire King pulled the mortal close, sinking his razor-sharp fangs deeply into Rousseau's neck. Rousseau's scream was muffled against Nathaniel's coat. The mob boss convulsed, his hands weakly beating against the vampire's indestructible chest as his life force was violently drained away. Nathaniel drank deeply, his eyes slipping shut as the rich, corrupt blood fueled his ancient veins. When he was finished, Nathaniel carelessly tossed Rousseau's lifeless pale husk onto the ruined floor of the penthouse. The head of the Rousseau syndicate was dead. The empire had fallen in a single night. Nathaniel wiped a single drop of blood from his chin, his mind already reaching back across the city, pulled by the invisible tether to the woman waiting for him in his tower. Back in the Millennium Tower, Sophia was pacing the length of the bedroom, her mind a chaotic storm of fear, awe, and an inexplicable burning desire. Something was happening to her body. The tea Sebastian had brought remained untouched on the nightstand. Sophia realized she could hear the faint rhythmic ticking of the Patek Philippe watch sitting in a velvet box across the massive room. She could smell the distinct metallic tang of the impending snowstorm brewing high above the clouds. Her vision in the dim light was unnervingly sharp. She could see the microscopic weave of the silk sheets. It was the blood. Nathaniel's blood inside her was rewriting her biology, heightening her senses to an agonizing degree. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors opened again. Sophia spun around. Nathaniel stood there. His pristine white shirt was ruined, torn at the shoulder where Dominic Croft had shot him, the fabric stained with soot rain and the blood of Victor Rousseau. He looked exhausted, yet utterly triumphant. Sophia's heightened senses caught the smell of the violence on him. A normal woman would have screamed. A normal woman would have run. But as Sophia looked into his golden eyes, the blood in her veins roared in recognition. She didn't see a monster. She saw her protector. She crossed the room before she even realized she was moving. She stopped right in front of him, her hands trembling as she reached out gently, touching the torn, blood-stained fabric over his shoulder. "You were hurt," Sophia whispered, looking up at him. "A mere scratch, Sophia," Nathaniel replied softly. He looked down at her, the feral glow in his eyes receding into a warm, mesmerizing amber. He reached up his large hand, gently covering hers where it rested against his chest. "Victor Rousseau is dead. His empire is ash. You will never have to look over your shoulder again." Sophia exhaled a shaky breath, a single tear slipping down her cheek. Why do all this for me? I'm just a nurse, Nathaniel. I just did my job that night in the ER. Why would you wage war on a crime syndicate for me?" Nathaniel stepped closer, invading her personal space. The heat radiating from his cold skin was intoxicating. He leaned down, his forehead resting gently against hers. "Because you did not just save my life that night, Sophia. You awakened something in me that had been dormant for 300 years. Nathaniel murmured, his breath ghosting over her lips. "When I looked into your eyes in that hospital room, my soul recognized yours. You are not just a nurse to me. You are my mate." Sophia's breath hitched. "Mate? It is a bond forged in blood and fate," Nathaniel explained, his voice a dark, seductive purr. "When I gave you my blood tonight in the alley, it did more than heal your shattered bones. It tied your life force to mine. You can feel it, can't you? The heightened senses, the pull in your chest whenever I am near." Sophia nodded slowly, entirely captivated by his gaze. "I feel like I'm burning from the inside out. You are adjusting. You are human, but my blood will protect you. It will make you stronger faster. It will keep you mine," Nathaniel said fiercely, his hands sliding down to grip her waist, pulling her flush against his hard, immortal body. Sophia knew she should pull away. She was a woman of science, of pragmatism. This was madness. He was a creature of darkness, a killer who ruled the shadows. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the profound, unyielding devotion hiding beneath the violence. He had burned down a city just to keep her safe. She tilted her head up, closing the distance between them. When Nathaniel's lips crashed against hers, it was an explosion of fire and ice. The kiss was desperate, possessive, and deeply intoxicating. Sophia let out a soft gasp, her hands tangling in his dark, damp hair, as he backed her up against the nearest wall. He kissed her like a starving man, his tongue tasting of copper and fine wine, his grip on her waist bruising and desperate. Sophia surrendered to the overwhelming power of the blood bond, returning his passion with a fierce, primal energy she didn't know she possessed. For a long moment, the world outside the tower faded away. There was no crime syndicate, no hospital, double shifts, no fear. There was only the king of the night and the mortal woman who held his immortal heart. When Nathaniel finally pulled away, they were both breathing heavily. He rested his chin on the top of her head, wrapping his arms tightly around her, burying his face in her dark hair. "You are safe now, my beautiful Sophia," he whispered. "I will never let anything harm you. Sophia rested her head against his chest, listening to the slow, powerful thud of his unnatural heartbeat. She felt safe, truly entirely safe for the first time in her adult life. But as she closed her eyes, a sudden dark thought pierced the romantic haze. Victor Rousseau was dead, but Arthur, her brother, was still out there. And if Rousseau hadn't found him, it meant Arthur was hiding from something else, something worse. "Nathaniel," Sophia said quietly, pulling back just enough to look into his eyes. "If Arthur's debt was to Rousseau, why did Arthur run in the first place? Rousseau's men said Arthur skipped town 3 weeks ago, long before the debt was actually due." Nathaniel's golden eyes narrowed slightly, his sharp mind processing the discrepancy. Before he could answer, the heavy oak doors of the bedroom flew open. Sebastian stood in the doorway, his usual calm demeanor entirely shattered. For the first time, the estate manager looked genuinely terrified. "Sire," Sebastian breathed, clutching a ringing, encrypted satellite phone in his hand. "Forgive the intrusion, but we have a catastrophic problem." Nathaniel stepped in front of Sophia, shielding her with his body. "Speak, Sebastian." "I just intercepted a transmission from the underground broker network," Sebastian said, his pale blue eyes wide with dread. "Victor Rousseau wasn't hunting Arthur Hayes for money, sire. The 150,000 was a cover." Sophia's heart dropped into her stomach. "What did my brother do?" Sebastian swallowed hard. "Arthur Hayes stole an artifact from a secure vault in the seaport. He stole the sunken codex, sire. The High Council of Vampires has just placed a global bounty on his head, and the hunters have just arrived in Boston." The romantic haze that had enveloped the penthouse shattered instantly, replaced by a freezing, suffocating dread. Sophia pulled away from Nathaniel, her mind racing to process the sheer gravity of Sebastian's words. "The sunken codex." Nathaniel's voice dropped an octave, the vibration rattling the crystal glasses on the bar across the room. The golden fire in his eyes roared back to life, volatile and dangerous. "Victor Rousseau possessed the codex, that arrogant mortal fool." "What is the codex?" Sophia demanded, her heart hammering against her newly healed ribs. Sebastian stepped further into the room, his aristocratic composure trembling. "It is an ancient ledger, Miss Hayes, forged during the Crusades. It contains the true names and bloodlines of the first sires, the original vampire kings. To possess a sire's true name is to hold absolute dominion over their will. It is a weapon of mass extinction for our kind. And the hunters?" Sophia asked, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of her neck. "The Order of St. Jude." Nathaniel practically spat the name, his jaw tight with centuries of unresolved hatred. "Fanatics. Mercenaries who use augmented weaponry and dark magic to hunt us. If they are in Boston, it is because they hired your brother to steal the codex from Rousseau's vault, using the mob boss as a blind spot." Sophia felt the floor drop out from beneath her. Arthur hadn't just crossed a mobster. He had unknowingly walked into an ancient supernatural war, and he was holding the nuclear launch codes. Before Nathaniel could formulate a plan, Sophia's discarded hospital coat, draped over a velvet armchair, began to vibrate. Her burner phone. She lunged for it, nearly tripping over the hem of the oversized silk shirt. She answered the call, pressing the cheap plastic to her ear. "Arthur," she gasped. "Sophia. Oh God, Sophia, I messed up." Arthur's voice was a frantic, terrified wheeze on the other end of the line. The background noise sounded like dripping water and echoing stone. "They're everywhere, men in tactical gear. They have these lights that burn. I didn't know what the book was, Sophia. I swear to God, the buyer just said he'd give me $1 million and wipe my debt with Rousseau." "Where are you?" Sophia demanded, her medical training snapping her panic into absolute focus. "I'm under Tremont Street, the old crypts beneath King's Chapel." "Sophia, they're sweeping the tunnels. You have to call the police. You have to—" The line went dead with a sharp crackle of static. Sophia dropped the phone, turning to Nathaniel. "King's Chapel. The historical crypts beneath Tremont and School Street. He's trapped down there. Sebastian, lock down the tower. Activate the UV shields and arm the perimeter," Nathaniel commanded, moving toward the heavy mahogany armoire. He threw open the doors, revealing an arsenal of custom weaponry that would make a military general weep. He bypassed the firearms, instead pulling a pair of curved, silver-hilted trench knives, sliding them seamlessly into the holsters beneath his tailored suit jacket. "Nathaniel, I'm going with you," Sophia said, stepping into his path. Nathaniel stopped, his eyes flashing with a terrifying absolute authority. "Absolutely not. You will remain here behind inch-thick ballistic glass and reinforced steel. The order is not like Rousseau's street thug Sophia. They use incendiary rounds laced with white phosphorus and liquid UV floodlights. I will not risk you. He is my brother, Sophia shouted, the vampire blood humming in her veins, giving her an unnatural courage. She stepped closer, tipping her chin up to meet his blazing gaze. And if you go in there alone, you'll be walking into a trap. Arthur said they're sweeping the tunnels. They want to draw you out. They want the king. Which is exactly why you cannot be there to be used as leverage. Nathaniel growled, his hands gripping her shoulders. Sophia, I just found you. I will not lose you. You won't, she promised, her voice dropping to a fierce, desperate whisper. She placed her hands over his cold chest. Your blood is inside me, Nathaniel. I can feel everything. I can see in the dark. I can hear the storm miles away. I know the anatomy of the human body better than anyone in this city, and I know exactly how those crypts are laid out. Let me help you. For a long, tense moment, the Vampire King stared down at the mortal woman. He saw the fierce, unyielding fire in her eyes, a fire that mirrored his own. She was not a fragile doll to be locked in a gilded cage. She was his equal. She was his queen. If you leave my side for even a fraction of a second, Nathaniel whispered, a deadly promise in his tone, I will burn this entire city to the bedrock. Do you understand me? Sophia nodded. Let's go get my brother. The sleek, armored Rolls-Royce Phantom cut through the torrential Boston rain like a phantom itself, arriving at the corner of Tremont Street within minutes. The historic King's Chapel loomed in the darkness, a heavy stone relic of the 18th century, its steeple piercing the low-hanging storm clouds. The iron gates of the cemetery were already busted open. Nathaniel moved with terrifying silence, guiding Sophia through the rows of weathered slate tombstones. Thanks to the blood bond, Sophia's vision pierced the heavy rain and darkness. She could see the faint glowing residue of ultraviolet tripwires strung between the ancient graves. Nathaniel bypassed them effortlessly, his hand wrapped tightly around Sophia's. They descended the stone stairwell leading into the church's subterranean crypts. The air down here was suffocating, smelling of ancient dust, damp earth, and ozone. Deep in the labyrinth of brick corridors and rusted iron gates, they heard it, the heavy, panicked breathing of a terrified man. Arthur, Sophia breathed, breaking away from Nathaniel just slightly to rush down the corridor. In a dead-end alcove surrounded by stacked colonial coffins, Arthur Hayes sat trembling on the dirt floor. He was soaked to the bone, his face smeared with mud and blood. Clutched desperately to his chest was a heavy lead-lined lockbox, ancient and covered in oxidized silver runes. Sophia, Arthur sobbed, scrambling to his feet. He looked from his sister to the towering, imposing figure of Nathaniel, stepping out of the shadows. Who is he? The man saving your life, you absolute idiot. Sophia snapped, her relief instantly giving way to fury. Give me the box, Arthur. I can't. A new, chillingly calm voice echoed down the stone corridor. Because the boy has a prior engagement with me. The temperature in the crypt spiked violently. From the opposite end of the tunnel, a dozen heavily armed men materialized from the shadows, their tactical gear completely blacked out. They carried heavy modified assault rifles with glowing blue underslung canisters. Stepping through the center of the formation was a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a tactical priest's collar. His eyes were cold, dead, and entirely devoid of mercy. He was Commander Gabriel Mercer, the apex predator of the Order of St. Jude. Nathaniel Cross? Mercer smiled, a cruel, thin line on his scarred face. The king of the eastern seaboard. I must admit, I didn't think the bait would pull you out of your tower so quickly, but then my scouts reported you took a particular liking to the trauma nurse. A king brought down by a mortal heartbeat. How poetic. Nathaniel didn't speak. The air around him began to warp and distort with raw telekinetic pressure. His fangs fully descended, his eyes blazing like two miniature suns in the dark crypt. Take the box, Sophia, Nathaniel whispered, his voice vibrating with lethal intent. And close your eyes. Light him up, Mercer roared. The crypt exploded into chaos. Blinding, concentrated bursts of liquid ultraviolet light erupted from the hunter's weapons, illuminating the ancient brick tunnel with the intensity of the midday sun. Sophia screamed as the unnatural light seared her retinas, dragging Arthur down behind a heavy granite tomb. But Nathaniel did not burn. With a roar that shook the foundations of the chapel above, the Vampire King launched himself directly into the barrage of UV fire. The light hissed and smoked against his flesh, but his ancient power was too vast, his rage too absolute. He moved like a localized hurricane of violence, He ripped the heavy iron door off a nearby crypt and hurled it like a frisbee down the corridor. It cleaved through 3 hunters, instantly pinning them to the brick wall with a sickening crunch. Nathaniel closed the distance before the remaining men could reload their silver nitrate rounds. He drove his fist through the tactical vest of a hunter, crushing his sternum into powder before using the dying man as a human shield against the incoming hail of bullets. He drew his silver-hilted trench knives, becoming a blur of steel and blood. He systematically dismantled the strike team, severing limbs and crushing windpipes with a terrifying, graceful efficiency. Sophia watched from behind the tomb, clutching the lead lockbox, her heart in her throat. She had known Nathaniel was dangerous, but seeing the King of the Night unleashed was a spectacle of horrifying beauty. "We have to run, Sophia," Arthur shrieked, pulling at her arm. "He's a monster. They're all monsters. He is saving us," Sophia yelled over the deafening gunfire. Suddenly, a heavy, titanium-reinforced boot kicked the granite tomb with enough force to crack the stone. Sophia gasped, falling backward. Commander Mercer stood over them, his combat knife drawn, glowing with a vile, green, toxic residue, dead man's blood, fatal even to vampires. While Nathaniel was occupied slaughtering the 12-man squad, Mercer had flanked them. "The king is distracted," Mercer sneered, reaching down and grabbing Sophia by her throat, dragging her to her feet. Sophia choked, kicking her legs, her hands scrambling against his iron grip. "Let her go," Arthur screamed, lunging at Mercer. Mercer casually backhanded Arthur with the butt of his pistol. The sickening crack of Arthur's jaw echoed loudly, and he crumpled to the dirt floor unconscious. "Sophia!" Nathaniel roared. He had just severed the head of the final hunter, but he froze as he turned around. Mercer held the glowing toxic blade mere millimeters from Sophia's jugular. Mercer tutted his eyes, locking onto Nathaniel. "Take one step cross, and I pump enough dead man's blood into her veins to rot her from the inside out." Nathaniel froze his chest, heaving, his clothes soaked in the blood of his enemies. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Vampire King looked utterly helpless. The absolute terror in his golden eyes as he looked at Sophia was heartbreaking. "What do you want, Mercer?" Nathaniel hissed, his hands slowly rising in a gesture of surrender. "The sunken codex," Mercer demanded, nodding toward the heavy box resting by Arthur's unconscious body. "But there's a catch, Cross. The box is sealed with a blood magic ward. A vampire cannot open it. A normal human cannot open it. It requires the blood of a mortal who has been willingly marked by a king, a human who houses royal vampire blood in their veins." Mercer smiled wickedly, pressing the knife harder against Sophia's skin. "That's why I lured you out. I needed you to mark her. I needed your blood in her veins so she could be the key to my weapon." Mercer shoved Sophia roughly toward the lockbox. "Open it, girl. Bleed on the runes, or I decapitate your brother and then your lover." Sophia fell to her knees beside the box. Her mind raced. The adrenaline mixed with the supernatural vitality of Nathaniel's blood made everything crystal clear. Mercer thought he had outsmarted them. He thought Sophia was just a pawn, but Sophia was a trauma nurse. She knew how blood worked, and thanks to the bond, she could feel exactly what the magic inside the box was doing. It wasn't just a lock, it was a conduit. Sophia looked up at Nathaniel. Their eyes met. In that fraction of a second, an entire silent conversation passed between them. She saw his trust. He saw her resolve. "Do it, Sophia," Nathaniel whispered, his voice steady. Sophia reached out, running her thumb along the jagged, broken edge of a silver bullet casing on the floor. The sharp metal sliced her skin. A thick drop of her blood, crimson but swirling with faint streaks of glowing gold, welled up. She pressed her bleeding thumb directly onto the center rune of the lead box. "Yes," Mercer breathed, stepping forward greedily, lowering his knife as the box began to hum. But the box didn't just unlock. The ancient magic recognized the blood of the king mixed with the absolute willing sacrifice of his mortal mate. The runes glowed a blinding, brilliant gold, matching Nathaniel's eyes. "What is happening?" Mercer yelled, shielding his face as a shockwave of raw kinetic energy began to build in the crypt. "You wanted my blood, Mercer?" Sophia said coldly, her voice echoing with a strange dual resonance, intertwining with Nathaniel's power. "You can have it." Sophia slammed both her hands down on the box, channeling the explosive energy of the bond entirely outward. A devastating shockwave of pure golden light erupted from the artifact. It wasn't UV light. It was ancient royal magic. It slammed into Mercer with the force of a freight train. The hunter commander screamed as the energy shattered his tactical armor, throwing him backward through the air. He smashed into the brick wall, every bone in his body shattering upon impact, his weapons destroyed in a shower of sparks. The light faded, leaving the crypt in near-total darkness, save for the ambient glow of the vampire's eyes. Before Mercer could even slide down the wall, Nathaniel was there. The Vampire King grabbed the broken commander by his throat, lifting him high into the air. Mercer choked on his own blood, his eyes wide in absolute horror. "You dared to touch my queen!" Nathaniel whispered, his voice the sound of a closing casket. With one swift, brutal motion, Nathaniel plunged his hand straight through Mercer's chest, crushing his heart instantly. He tossed the lifeless body aside like a piece of discarded garbage. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of the torrential rain leaking through the crypt ceiling. Nathaniel rushed to Sophia's side. He fell to his knees in the dirt, entirely uncaring of the blood and mud ruining his suit. He carefully took her hands, inspecting the small cut on her thumb. With impossible gentleness, he brought her hand to his lips, kissing the wound. It healed instantly. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice trembling with a vulnerability that completely contrasted the massacre surrounding them. "I'm okay," Sophia breathed, collapsing against his chest. She wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders, burying her face in the crook of his neck, breathing in the scent of rain, ozone, and victory. "I'm okay, we're okay." Nathaniel held her impossibly tight, burying his face in her dark hair. For a long moment, the immortal king simply let himself feel the beating heart of the woman who had saved him, not just from a physical wound in a hospital, but from centuries of profound, hollow loneliness. A low groan broke the silence. Arthur Hayes slowly sat up, clutching his shattered jaw, looking at the absolute carnage around them. He stared at Nathaniel, then at Sophia in his arms, terror completely overriding his pain. "Sophia!" Arthur whimpered, scooting away from them. Sophia pulled back from Nathaniel and looked at her brother. The pity she used to feel for him was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Arthur's reckless greed had nearly gotten them all killed. Nathaniel stood up, towering over the cowering mortal. He reached down and effortlessly hoisted the heavy lead box containing the sunken codex under his arm. "Arthur Hayes," Nathaniel said, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "You stole a weapon that could have ended my kind. You brought the Order of St. Jude to my city. By all rights, your life is forfeit." Arthur squeezed his eyes shut, sobbing into his hands. "But," Nathaniel continued, his golden eyes flickering down to Sophia, "you share blood with the woman who holds my heart, and for that reason alone you will live." Nathaniel reached into his ruined jacket and pulled out a heavy gold coin, tossing it into the dirt at Arthur's feet. "Take that coin to the harbor master at Pier 6. He will put you on a cargo ship bound for South America. You will have a new identity and enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your natural life." Nathaniel commanded, his voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. "But if you ever set foot in Boston again, if you ever try to contact Sophia again, I will tear you apart slowly. Do we have an understanding?" Arthur nodded frantically, scrambling to his feet, clutching the coin like a lifeline. He looked at Sophia one last time, tears streaming down his bruised face. "I'm sorry, Sophia. I'm so sorry." "Go, Arthur," Sophia said quietly, her voice devoid of emotion. "Just go." Arthur didn't hesitate. He turned and sprinted down the dark corridor, disappearing into the shadows of the tunnels, out of her life forever. Sophia stood up, brushing the dirt from her silk shirt. She looked around the ruined crypt, the bodies of the hunters, the blood-soaked earth. It was a nightmare, yet she felt a profound sense of peace. The debts were paid. The monsters were dead. Nathaniel stepped toward her, offering his hand. The golden fire in his eyes had settled into a deep, warm amber, filled with an ancient, unwavering devotion. "The sun will be rising soon, my queen," Nathaniel said softly, a genuine smile gracing his aristocratic features for the first time. "Shall we go home?" Sophia looked at his outstretched hand. She was a practical woman. She knew what this meant. To take his hand was to leave her human life behind forever. It meant embracing the shadows, the blood, and the eternal dangerous world of the Vampire King. She smiled, placing her hand firmly in his. The spark of electricity rushed up her arm, settling deep within her heart. "Take me home, Nathaniel. They walked out of the crypts and back into the Boston rain hand in hand. By dawn, the city of Boston was quiet. The Rousseau Syndicate was a memory. The Order of St. Jude was broken. And every man in the underworld knew that a new era had begun, an era ruled by an immortal king and the fiercely brilliant mortal queen who stood unbending by his side. What a breathtaking conclusion to Sophia and Nathaniel's dark romantic saga. From a blood-soaked alleyway to the ancient crypts beneath Boston, Sophia proved that she is no damsel in distress but a true queen of the night. But is the High Council of Vampires truly done with Nathaniel? Or is another war brewing in the shadows? If you love this intense vampire romance, please smash that like button and share this story with your fellow dark romance fans. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss our next thrilling audio drama. Let us know in the comments, would you have taken Nathaniel's hand? See you in the next episode.